In the year 1892, on the outskirts of a forgotten village in Eastern Europe, a chilling discovery was made that would alter the quiet lives of its people forever. It began, as many terrible things often do, with the sound of earth being disturbed in the dead of night. A farmer named Joseph Krevitz, walking back from a late evening market, claimed he saw a shadow kneeling at the edge of the communal burial ground, its hands clawing desperately at the soil as though seeking to escape the grave rather than enter it. Joseph froze, transfixed by the unnatural sight, until the figure seemed to vanish into the mist, leaving behind the muffled cries of what he swore were human screams rising from beneath the ground. When dawn came, villagers gathered at the graveyard and found, to their horror, one of the burial mounds freshly torn apart, the coffin lid cracked open, and the corpse inside mutilated beyond recognition, its chest ripped open as if someone or something had tried to tear out the heart. Witnesses whispered of curses, of black magic, and of bodies refusing to rest. But was it superstition feeding fear, or was there truly something sinister lurking in that soil? And before we go deeper into this story, I want to ask you, where are you listening from tonight, and what hour of the night does this reach you? Because as you'll learn in this tale, time and place can change how close we feel to the darkness we are about to uncover. The village of Blackthorn Hollow had always carried a reputation draped in Gothic shadows. Surrounded by dense forests, where mist curled between the trees and wolves howled at twilight, the settlement lived by traditions and superstition older than memory. Candles were kept burning in windows long after midnight to ward off wandering spirits, and the villagers believed that the dead must be buried with iron nails driven into their coffins, lest they rise again in search of blood. It was here, among these people, that the incident of 1892 began to fester. The mutilated grave was not the first unexplained occurrence. Weeks earlier, families had reported hearing knocks on their windows at night, though no visitor was ever found. Livestock were discovered drained of blood, their bodies stiff and eyes wide open as though they had seen something unspeakable in their last moments. Children whispered of a pale woman who wandered near the cemetery, her eyes black as coal, her dress tattered like the wings of a moth. Adults dismissed it as imagination, but as bodies began to appear desecrated in their coffins, the whispers grew into shouts of panic. The burial ground was no longer a place of peace. It had become a stage for something dark, something no priest's sermon or villager's prayer could contain. At first, the elders urged silence, fearing that speaking of it aloud would give the evil more power. But silence only allowed suspicion to spread like rot. Who had desecrated the graves? Was it a human killer driven by madness and ritual, or something that had never been human at all? It was then that we meet the figure who would carry this case into history. Constable Elias Dreyer, a young investigator sent from the district capital, arrived in Blackthorn Hollow with a skeptical eye. Educated in the sciences, hardened by years of dealing with theft and murder in the city, Dreyer dismissed the villagers' tales of the undead as nonsense. To him, this was a crime, a brutal, deliberate crime committed by someone who used local fears to cloak their actions. Yet even Dreyer could not deny the unease that weighed upon him as he stood over the mutilated corpse of the first grave victim. The body was that of Marta Vescu, a widow who had died peacefully of illness only 2 weeks earlier. Her coffin now told a different story. Claw marks on the lid, as though she had tried to fight her way out, and deep wounds across her chest where her heart had been cut open. No blood remained in the cavity. The villagers gasped and whispered that this was proof of black magic, of witches summoning the dead to walk again, or of spirits that refused to stay buried. Dreyer leaned closer, his lantern casting a wavering glow. He noted the precision of the cuts, the careful removal of the heart. This was no random act of madness. It was methodical. Someone had taken the heart for a purpose. But what? And could it be that the screams Joseph claimed to hear were not delusions but something very real, something too dreadful to ignore. Days passed, and the atmosphere in Blackthorn Hollow grew heavy with fear. Dreyer began interviewing villagers, trying to pierce the veil of superstition that clouded every answer. He learned of old rituals whispered about but never admitted openly, rituals where hearts were taken to bind spirits, to control them, or to sacrifice them in exchange for forbidden power. One name kept surfacing in hushed tones: Anya Moros, a reclusive woman who lived at the edge of the forest, believed by many to be a witch. Children claimed she spoke with shadows, that her hut reeked of herbs and bones, and that no priest dared cross her path. Dreyer initially dismissed these tales as scapegoating, yet the details surrounding her past were harder to ignore. She had been accused years earlier of practicing black magic after her husband's mysterious death, though no evidence had ever been found. Still, the people of Blackthorn Hollow feared her, and fear, Dreyer knew, was as dangerous as any blade. Was Anya truly at the heart of this darkness, or was she merely another victim of superstition, destined to be blamed for crimes she did not commit? The investigator could not yet answer, but he sensed that the graveyard was only the beginning. The mutilations were not random. There was a pattern waiting to be uncovered, a secret buried alive that demanded to be unearthed. Constable Elias Dreyer could not shake the feeling that the soil itself in Blackthorn Hollow was hiding more than bones. Each night he stayed in the village. He noted how the silence was punctured not by natural sounds of owls or crickets, but by faint cries carried through the fog. They were never loud, never clear, just enough to force him awake in the dark hours, questioning whether he had dreamt them. The villagers avoided the graveyard now, leaving candles at their doorways instead, convinced the dead were no longer resting. When Dreyer returned to the site of Martha Vescu's grave for a closer inspection, he noticed something peculiar. The disturbed soil bore not only marks of digging from above, but narrow impressions as though fingers or claws had clawed upward from within. The coffin lid, though splintered, bore scratches not aligned with the initial cracks, as if something inside had tried to break free. Dreyer leaned into his logic. Someone must have desecrated the grave and manufactured the scene to terrify. Yet deep inside, a thought gnawed. What if Joseph Kravitz's story of screams from underground was true? Could a body truly cry out after burial? Determined to unravel superstition with evidence, Dreyer ordered that another coffin be exhumed, one belonging to a young man named Petre Iliescu, who had died the same month. Villagers protested furiously, warning that disturbing the grave would invite more curses, but Dreyer's authority prevailed. Under a gray morning sky, a small group gathered as the coffin was unearthed. The lid creaked open, and gasps broke through the cold air. Petra's body was contorted, his mouth frozen wide in a silent scream, his fingernails torn and caked with wood fibers. Strangely, his chest bore the same horrific mutilation, his heart missing, the cavity clean and bloodless. Dreyer stepped back, fighting an unease he refused to show. Could both coffins have been tampered with after burial? If so, why was there no evidence of entry or tools at the grave sites? What disturbed him more was the precision of the wounds, exact cuts as though performed by skilled, ritualistic hands. This was no random violence, it was deliberate extraction. Who in the village possessed such knowledge, and for what purpose would they steal the hearts of the dead? Fear spread faster than logic. Rumors ignited that the dead were being harvested for black rites. Villagers spoke of a centuries-old superstition known as the last grave, a belief that when the final grave in a cemetery was desecrated, the souls of all buried there would rise in torment, bound to the will of whoever commanded them. Dreyer, hearing this, recognized both a folkloric tale and a possible clue. If someone was attempting to enact this ritual, then the mutilations were not random desecrations, they were steps in a sequence. The constable sought counsel with Father André, the village priest, who reluctantly admitted that Local records from the 17th century spoke of similar incidents. An epidemic had once swept through the village, and graves were found desecrated, hearts removed, bodies twisted in expressions of terror. At the time, villagers executed 3 women accused of sorcery, but no proof had been given that the murders ceased because of their deaths. Dreyer listened intently, realizing that history here repeated itself like an unending curse. But who in 1892 was attempting to finish what had begun long ago? Suspicion inevitably fell heavier on Anya Moroz. Dreyer paid her a visit, walking through a forest path, thick with mist where gnarled branches seemed to clutch at him. Her hut stood crooked, surrounded by charms made of bone and string, talismans dangling like silent watchers. Inside, the air was pungent with herbs and smoke. Anya, older now but piercing in gaze, did not tremble before authority. She asked Dreyer what it was he feared most, the living or the dead. He pressed her on the graves, but she denied involvement, instead warning him that Blackthorn Hollow's earth was poisoned long before she was born. "The village buries lies with the dead," she whispered. "But lies don't rot," they claw back. Dreyer dismissed her words outwardly, but he noted how her hut contained not only herbs, but anatomical sketches, jars of preserved animal organs, and strange symbols carved into wood. Was she simply a healer with misunderstood practices, or was she entwined in the very horror he was trying to unravel? That night, another body was discovered not in a coffin, but freshly killed. A shepherd named Luca had vanished, and his corpse was found near the cemetery boundary, his throat torn open, his body drained of blood. His chest, too, bore the horrific mark, his heart cut out with surgical precision. For the first time, suspicion was no longer limited to the dead. The killer was not only exhuming bodies, they were creating new ones. Fear swept Blackthorn Hollow to the point of frenzy. Mothers barricaded their homes, children were forbidden near the windows, and whispers of a blood cult echoed through the streets. Dreyer tightened his investigation, torn between the rational explanation of a human murderer skilled in ritualistic killing and the chilling possibility that the graves had unleashed something unearthly, something that could not be contained by reason alone. But as he stood over Luca's bloodless body, one thought consumed him. Was this the work of human hands, or had something long buried been freed from the soil at last? Constable Dreyer's investigation began to consume him entirely. Each day brought a new horror, and each night offered no respite. Sleep became fragmented by dreams of coffins clawed from the inside, and eyes staring from darkened corners. The village, once quiet, had descended into paranoia. Doors were barred with iron, windows bolted, and no one dared tread near the cemetery after sunset. Yet Dreyer knew the pattern of the murders would not stop until he uncovered the root of the madness. He meticulously charted the locations of each desecrated grave and fresh murder, hoping the geography might reveal a pattern or a signature. Each site was eerily similar, isolated, shadowed by trees, and with soil showing the same claw marks as Martavescu's grave. Dreyer began to suspect that whoever or whatever was behind this knew the land intimately. The killer did not strike at random. These acts were calculated, ritualistic, and connected to the very topography of Blackthorn Hollow. But even as he noted the precision, a creeping dread settled upon him. Some patterns were too perfect, too symmetrical, as though a mind beyond comprehension orchestrated them. As the investigation deepened, more villagers began reporting ghostly activity. Lights flickered inexplicably in abandoned homes. Faint whispers called their names from the woods, and some swore they saw figures crawling from freshly disturbed graves. Dreyer remained cautious of superstition, yet he could not ignore the consistency of the accounts. One night, he was called to the home of the widow of Petre Iliescu. She claimed that at midnight, the floorboards near the hearth had shifted, revealing clawed marks underneath, and that she had heard a whisper, "Return what is mine." Dreyer inspected the floor in silence. The scratches were shallow but unmistakable, resembling the same marks seen in the graves. Could it be a human mimicry of supernatural behavior? Or was the village truly confronting something that defied natural law? Even for a man trained to think rationally, the line between folklore and reality blurred in Blackthorn Hollow. Dreyer recorded the incident meticulously, but in the pit of his stomach, he felt the grip of fear tighten. This was no ordinary killer. This was something patient, intelligent, and deeply intertwined with the darkness of the land itself. Days later, Dreyer returned to Anya Moroz's hut, determined to extract truth from her cryptic warnings. He found her tending to a cauldron that emitted a thick, acrid smoke. Anya did not flinch as he accused her of the murders. Instead, she offered an unsettling revelation. The dead will answer for what the living have hidden. The soil remembers every secret, every betrayal. Those buried unjustly will claw their way back. Dreyer realized the layers of motive extended beyond murder for blood or heart. They were symbolic acts tied to unresolved sins, hidden grudges, and age-old superstitions. Anya led him to a series of journals, their pages filled with sketches of graves, arcane symbols, and cryptic notes about rituals to awaken the soil's memory. The entries described methods to extract hearts, not merely for killing, but to bind spirits to reveal hidden truths. Dreyer's rational mind fought the implications. Was someone enacting these instructions to expose secrets, or was this a centuries-old belief manifesting in horrifying reality? Either way, the next act would be inevitable, and the body count had already proven that hesitation was deadly. Days later, Dreyer returned to Anya Moroz's hut, determined to extract truth from her cryptic warnings. He found her tending to a cauldron that emitted a thick, acrid smoke. Anya did not flinch as he accused her of the murders. Instead, she offered an unsettling revelation. The dead will answer for what the living have hidden. The soil remembers every secret, every betrayal. Those buried unjustly will claw their way back. Dreyer realized the layers of motive extended beyond murder for blood or heart. They were symbolic acts tied to unresolved sins, hidden grudges, and age-old superstitions. Anya led him to a series of journals, their pages filled with sketches of graves, arcane symbols, and cryptic notes about rituals to awaken the soil's memory. The entries described methods to extract hearts, not merely for killing, but to bind spirits to reveal hidden truths. Dreyer's rational mind fought the implications. Was someone enacting these instructions to expose secrets, or was this a centuries-old belief manifesting in horrifying reality? Either way, the next act would be inevitable, and the body count had already proven that hesitation was deadly. By mid-July, the village experienced an escalation. A group of children playing near the cemetery vanished, leaving behind only their shoes at the graveyard entrance. Panic turned to hysteria, and villagers demanded action from Dreyer, accusing him of being ineffective. He organized a patrol and discovered the children hidden in an abandoned crypt beneath the oldest section of the cemetery. They were unharmed physically, but their eyes held terror that no adult could explain. One whispered repeatedly, "They want the heart, the last heart." Dreyer examined the crypt, noting arcane markings on the walls, soot from candles, and traces of animal blood. This was no longer a series of random murders, it was a meticulously planned sequence, escalating from graves to living victims. The constable pieced together the chilling possibility that the murderer or cult believed in a final act, a culmination of blood and ritual that would bind or awaken something beyond understanding. And as he traced the layout of the crypt, he noticed a strange alignment. It corresponded exactly with the oldest graves in the cemetery, those whose burials predated even the oldest living villager. Was the pattern repeating history, or was someone attempting to rewrite it entirely? Evidence, however, was scarce. There were no footprints near the recent murder scenes except faint impressions in the soft soil, which disappeared into the mist as though swallowed by the night. The weapons used to extract hearts had vanished, leaving only deep, precise cuts that suggested not a tool but skill, ritual, and determination. Dreyer consulted with the district coroner, who confirmed that the mutilations were done post-mortem, but were too clean for crude implements. The coroner noted that the victims had been drained of blood almost entirely, but the pattern suggested it was collected carefully, not wasted, a methodical, almost ceremonial act. As Dreyer studied the evidence, he began to hypothesize a terrifying conclusion. The murders were not simply acts of cruelty, they were part of a larger, dark narrative, a plan orchestrated with purpose, patience, and perhaps knowledge lost to the living. And if his theory was correct, the final act had yet to occur. Whoever or whatever was driving the killings was still at work, and the next target would be chosen not by chance, but by design. As July waned, the air in Blackthorn Hollow became thick with dread. Even the sunlight seemed hesitant, seeping weakly through the dense canopy of trees that framed the village like watchful sentinels. Dreyer, now consumed by the investigation, noticed a psychological pattern emerging among the villagers. Fear had begun to erode reason. Families accused neighbors, old grievances resurfaced, and trust became a fragile illusion. In this charged atmosphere, another body was discovered, this time the corpse of a school teacher named Elena Popescu, her hands twisted in unnatural angles, mouth frozen in a scream, and chest once again emptied of its vital organ. What made this incident different was the discovery nearby, a carefully arranged circle of candles with arcane symbols etched in the dirt, surrounding a small blackened mound of earth. Dreyer examined the site closely. The symbols did not match any conventional occult practice he knew, yet they echoed centuries-old warnings recorded in Anya Morose's journals. It became increasingly clear that this was not merely murder, it was ritualistic, designed to create terror and enforce an ancient belief system that blended superstition, black magic, and a twisted notion of justice. Each new murder was a message, each desecrated grave a warning that the past would not remain buried. But what was the ultimate goal, and why were the living now included in the cycle of violence? Determined to break the chain, Dreyer began a covert surveillance of the cemetery at night. The mist rolled in thick waves, and the shadows between the gravestones seemed alive, stretching and twisting as if watching him. At approximately midnight, he witnessed a figure moving silently among the graves, lit by the pale silver of the moon. The figure, cloaked and deliberate, paused over a mound recently disturbed and began to dig with bare hands. Dreyer held his breath, noting the precision of every movement. Finally, the figure withdrew a body from the grave and placed it on the soil in front of him. Dreyer approached, revealing the intruder with a flash of his lantern. The figure turned, and Dreyer's blood ran cold. It was Anya Morose, but she carried no malice in her eyes, only a grim determination. She whispered, "It is not what you think. The soil is speaking. They are not at rest. If I do not act, the darkness will consume more than this village." Dreyer, torn between suspicion and understanding, watched as she performed a strange ritual, murmuring incantations and tracing the patterns from her journals over the exposed corpse. The air thickened with a metallic scent, and the shadows seemed to writhe. For the first time, Dreyer questioned whether some truths were too vast for rational minds, whether superstition and reality could intersect in the most terrifying ways. Weeks later, another body surfaced under the floorboards of the village chapel. The victim, a young priest named Father Mihail, was found with a deep, clean cut across his chest and a missing heart. The parishioners, already on edge from the prior killings, blamed Anya outright, accusing her of blasphemy and murder. Dreyer intervened, insisting on a rational examination. Upon inspection, he noticed traces of the same candle wax and arcane symbols near the body as at Elena Popescu's murder. It was the signature of the same individual or the same belief system carried forward with purpose. Dreyer began to realize that the killings followed a sequence designed to culminate in a final symbolic act, one that would complete the cycle of revelation Anya had alluded to. But with each new discovery, the psychological weight on Dreyer grew unbearable. He found himself haunted by visions of corpses clawing from the soil, of whispered voices repeating the villagers' darkest secrets, of shadowed figures moving silently among the tombstones. Night after night, he documented every detail, knowing that one misstep could make him the next target. Yet, he also began to see the pattern that others missed. The murders were revealing a hidden truth about Blackthorn Hollow, about sins committed generations ago, and about the thin line between superstition and human cruelty. The turning point came with the discovery of a hidden chamber beneath the oldest section of the cemetery. Dreyer, guided by notes from Anya's journals and the recurring symbol patterns at each crime scene, unearthed a subterranean passage lined with centuries-old coffins. Each coffin bore inscriptions of the names of villagers long forgotten, many of whom had died under mysterious circumstances. In the center of the chamber lay a stone altar, stained dark with dried blood, its surface etched with intricate symbols of life, death, and memory. Dreyer realized that the killings, the heart extractions, and the supposed supernatural activity were all connected to this place, a nexus of ancestral guilt and ritualistic power. Here, the line between reality and legend blurred completely. The chamber seemed to hum with a presence, almost as if the souls of the buried had been bound to this place, seeking resolution through the acts committed above. Dreyer's mind raced. Could the murders truly be a means to awaken these spirits, to demand justice from beyond the grave? Or was this a delusion orchestrated by a human mind exploiting fear for power and control? The villagers' fear reached a fever pitch. Nights were sleepless, and rumors spread of ghostly apparitions wandering near the chamber. Dreyer, methodical as ever, cross-referenced each murder with old village records, noting that every victim had ties to families implicated in dark deeds, centuries earlier brutal killings, secret betrayals, and hidden acts of vengeance that had been buried alongside them. The murders were not random. They were targeted, symbolic, and historically resonant. Anya Moros, far from being the instigator, appeared to be executing a ritual to contain the awakening force, attempting to reconcile past sins before they consumed the living. Dreyer finally understood that he was witnessing a confrontation between history and the present, between superstition and reality, and between the living and the dead. And as the full moon rose above Blackthorn Hollow, he realized that the final act, the one that would either end or unleash the terror, was imminent, and that the entire village's fate rested on what would happen in the chamber below the cemetery. The night of the final act descended like a shroud over Blackthorn Hollow. Dreyer approached the cemetery with caution, every step muffled by the damp earth and thick fog curling around the tombstones. The village lay silent, a hush that felt unnatural, as if even the wind feared to disturb the tense anticipation. Following the trail of arcane symbols and whispered accounts, he descended into the hidden chamber beneath the oldest graves, lantern trembling in his hand. There, the stone altar awaited, surrounded by the centuries-old coffins of those long forgotten. Candles flickered, casting grotesque shadows on the walls. Anya Moroz stood at the center, her hands steady as she traced the intricate patterns carved into the altar, murmuring the same incantations that had echoed through her journals. Around her, the air thickened, carrying the faint metallic scent of blood and something else, an almost tangible pressure, as if unseen eyes were watching, waiting, judging, Dreyer's breath caught in his throat. Every instinct screamed that the culmination of the ritual, whether human or supernatural, would decide the fate of the village itself. As the ritual progressed, the ground trembled faintly, and Dreyer noticed subtle movements in the shadows' shapes shifting in ways the light could not explain. The coffins along the walls rattled, lids shifting imperceptibly, and for a heartbeat, the constable swore he saw fingers clawing their way upward. The victims' hearts, meticulously removed and placed upon the altar in a macabre sequence, seemed to pulse with an unseen life, as though the energy of their deaths had been captured and bound. Anya's voice rose in intensity, speaking words in a language Dreyer could not understand. Her eyes glazed with a determination that bordered on the supernatural. The centuries-old grudge embedded in the village's history manifested before him, bloodlines intertwined with secrets, betrayals, and sins long buried but never forgotten. Dreyer felt the weight of every murder, every mutilation, every scream converging into this single terrifying moment. It became horrifyingly clear that the ritual was not only about vengeance, it was about revelation, forcing the living to confront what had been concealed beneath layers of earth and time. Then came the climax. A deafening cracking echoed through the chamber as the oldest coffins shifted violently. Dreyer's lantern nearly fell as he stumbled back, witnessing a sight that would forever haunt him. Pale, spectral forms clawing their way from the tombs, eyes hollow yet burning with accusation, reaching toward the altar, toward the hearts laid bare. The air was electric, charged with something ancient and malevolent, yet ordered, deliberate. Anya continued her incantations, her hands steady as if commanding the spirits themselves. Dreyer understood in that instant that the murders had been a bridge, a sequence of sacrifices and desecrations necessary to awaken the truths buried by time. Every mutilated corpse, every stolen heart, had been a key to unlock a long-forgotten justice. And as the apparitions pressed closer, silent yet accusatory, Dreyer realized that the living, himself included, were as much a part of the ritual as the dead. He felt the psychological weight of generations, the moral complexity of vengeance, guilt, and the desperate attempt to reconcile the past with the present. When the ritual concluded, the spirit slowly receded, leaving the chamber silent except for the flicker of candlelight and the heavy breathing of the constable and Anya Moroz. Dreyer examined the altar and coffins. Nothing remained moving, nothing stirred. The victims' hearts were intact on the altar, surrounded by symbols now glowing faintly in the dim light. Anya turned to him, voice calm, almost gentle. The soil remembers. The truth must be seen even if it terrifies. Balance has returned, for now. Dreyer, shaken to his core, understood that this ordeal had forced him to confront the intersection of superstition, morality, and history in a way rational explanation could barely touch. The village, now free from immediate terror, would forever carry the shadows of these events, the memory of those brutal murders, and the knowledge that some secrets, no matter how deeply buried, claw their way to the surface. As dawn broke over Blackthorn Hollow, Dreyer emerged from the cemetery with Anya silently walking beside him. The villagers gathered, wary and silent, sensing the conclusion of something profound. Dreyer addressed them, his voice measured but carrying the weight of all he had witnessed. The darkness we feared was not merely in the soil nor solely in one person. It was in our history, our secrets, and the acts we thought forgotten. What has been buried alive has now been acknowledged and perhaps for the first time allowed to rest. The village slowly exhaled, a mixture of relief, confusion, and awe washing over them. And yet, even as life resumed its fragile normalcy, a lingering question remained. How many of the terrors were truly gone, and how many had simply retreated into the shadows, waiting for another generation to disturb them? If you want to explore more chilling tales like this, uncover secrets buried for centuries, and dive deep into the darkest chapters of history. Make sure to subscribe, hit that like button, and share this story with others who dared to confront the unknown. Remember, the dead may rest, but their stories live on, waiting to be unearthed.